Kentucky is often described as quiet, rural, and predictable. That description only works if you ignore what has been recorded there. Across forests, caves, back roads, and small towns, events occurred that were not rumors and not folklore. They were witnessed, investigated, and then left without resolution. In several cases, official explanations were offered that failed to answer the most basic questions. In others, no explanation was offered at all. People disappeared. Objects were seen and logged. Entire locations developed reputations no authority was willing to challenge. What connects these cases is not fear. It is the absence of closure. Lock your doors, put on your headphones, because after this video, you will never see Kentucky the same way again. The cave that refuses to be fully mapped. From the outside, the land looks ordinary. Trees, gentle hills, nothing that suggests instability. What lies beneath it is different. Beneath this ground exists a cave system so extensive that its true limits remain unknown, despite generations of exploration, funding, and scientific attention. Mammoth Cave is recognized as the largest known cave system on the planet. That fact is often presented as a triumph of discovery. What is discussed far less is what has happened inside it repeatedly without resolution. Early explorers documented passages that seemed to alter direction without logic. Routes mapped one year could not be reliably relocated the next. Sounds were reported deep underground with no visible source. Not echoes, movement, breathing, scraping. Descriptions remained cautious, written in language meant to avoid ridicule, but consistent enough to raise concern among those who kept returning below the surface. Over time, disappearances occurred. Not tourists wandering off marked paths, but experienced guides and researchers familiar with underground navigation. In several cases, individuals were last seen entering known sections and never emerged. Search operations followed standard procedure: ropes, markers, teams rotating through mapped corridors. The results were always the same: trails stopped in places where there was nowhere logical to go. The cave complicates searches in ways that defy expectation. Air currents shift without warning. Sounds travel in misleading directions. Depth perception collapses in total darkness. Investigators noted that calls for help sometimes appeared to come from areas already cleared, leading teams to double back and lose valuable time. No collapses were found. No equipment failures large enough to explain the outcomes. As mapping technology improved, so did frustration. Each newly charted section revealed additional branches. Narrow passages widened unexpectedly. Chambers appeared where none were predicted. The cave did not behave like a static structure. It behaved like a system still revealing itself, faster than it could be understood. Officials emphasized safety and scale, framing the danger as environmental rather than anomalous. That explanation covers some risks, but not all recorded details. There are sections that remain restricted, not because they are unstable, but because repeated attempts to survey them ended without usable data. Instruments malfunctioned. Markers went missing. Teams reported disorientation disproportionate to conditions. Veteran cavers describe a specific sensation when entering certain depths. Not fear, not panic, a pressure to leave, a feeling of being unwelcome that arrives without a clear trigger. Those accounts are rarely written into reports, but they are shared quietly among professionals who spend time underground. The most unsettling detail is not that Mammoth Cave is dangerous. That is expected. It is that after centuries of effort, it still resists completion. Its map is provisional, its boundaries negotiable, its interior refuses to become final. People often assume unexplored means undiscovered. In this case, unexplored means something else entirely. It means approached, entered, and not fully returned from again and again. The cave remains open. Tours continue. Research continues. But those who know it best understand a reality that does not appear on visitor signs. Mammoth Cave is not unfinished because humans lack time. It is unfinished because the cave does not yield itself all at once, and whatever is responsible for that resistance has never felt obligated to explain itself. The object that shut down an entire town's attention. The first reports came in calmly, not panicked, not dramatic. Local residents contacted authorities to report an object in the sky that did not behave like an aircraft they recognized. It was large, metallic in appearance, and visible for an extended period of time. It did not blink, it did not drift randomly. It moved with intention. Within minutes, the reports multiplied. Police officers stepped outside to observe it themselves. What they saw matched the civilian descriptions closely enough that calls were logged as credible. The object maintained altitude while shifting direction sharply, something conventional aircraft could not do under the conditions present that night. Military interest followed quickly. Nearby installations were notified. Pilots were scrambled to visually identify the object. Radar operators tracked a target that did not match known flight profiles. This was not a single witness event. It involved civilians, law enforcement, and military personnel observing the same anomaly in real time. As aircraft approached, the object changed behavior. It climbed rapidly, then it stopped, then it moved again without visible propulsion. One pursuing pilot continued the approach, despite fuel concerns and diminishing visibility. His aircraft was later lost. Wreckage was recovered. The pilot did not survive. Official statements moved fast. The object was identified as something ordinary, a weather-related phenomenon, a misidentified object. Each explanation changed slightly over time, adjusting to public questions without fully addressing all recorded observations. Radar data was not released in full. Audio logs were summarized, not published. What troubled local authorities was the sequence, not the conclusion. Multiple agencies had treated the object as real and unknown before the narrative shifted. That transition was never explained clearly. The town noticed. People remembered how seriously it was taken before language softened. Residents described how the atmosphere changed that night. Streets emptied. Radios carried conflicting reports. People stayed awake, watching the sky instead of their clocks. For several hours, daily life paused, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. The most disturbing detail is what happened afterward. Discussion was discouraged. Reports were filed and archived. Witnesses were not accused of lying, but their accounts were reframed as mistaken. The pilot's death was separated from the object itself in official language, treated as an unfortunate coincidence rather than part of the same event. Years later, requests for clarification produced nothing new, no complete data release, no final explanation that accounted for every element. The case remained technically closed, but intellectually unresolved. The object was never recovered. No debris matched its description. No flight plan explained its presence. For the people who watched it, the memory stayed precise, not exaggerated, not improved with time. The same shape, the same motion, the same moment when authority treated the unknown as real, then quietly stepped away from that position. The town returned to normal. The sky did not change, but for those paying attention, something important happened that night. A clear signal that when an event draws too much attention at once, resolution is not always the goal. Sometimes containment is. The historic site where people become suddenly ill. The building was designed to save lives. That was its stated purpose, and for a time it did exactly that. Patients arrived hoping for recovery, treatment, and time. Many did not leave. What remains today is not just an abandoned structure, but a location where physical reactions continue to occur without a clear medical explanation. Waverly Hills Sanatorium sits on elevated ground overlooking the city. From the outside, it appears quiet, even restrained. Inside, visitors and staff have reported a consistent pattern of sudden physical distress that does not behave like panic, suggestion, or environmental exposure. People describe nausea that arrives without warning, sharp headaches, dizziness strong enough to force them to sit or lie down. In some cases, individuals reported difficulty breathing despite normal air quality readings. These reactions have occurred across different floors, seasons, and visitor groups, often affecting only one person at a time while others remain unaffected. Medical professionals have been among those impacted. Their accounts tend to avoid emotional language. Instead, they focus on timing. The symptoms begin abruptly, peak quickly, then fade once the individual leaves a specific area of the building. Standard explanations, such as mold exposure, temperature change, or poor ventilation, have been investigated repeatedly. None have accounted for the selective nature of the episodes. Equipment malfunctions have been documented alongside these reactions. Battery-powered devices fail prematurely. Monitoring tools produce inconsistent readings that stabilize once removed from the site. This does not happen constantly, but often enough to be noted by multiple independent groups over the years. The building's history complicates interpretation. During its operation, it housed thousands of patients suffering from severe illness. Death was frequent. A concealed passage was constructed to remove bodies discreetly, minimizing emotional impact on those still alive inside. That passage remains intact, and reports of physical discomfort cluster disproportionately around it. Skeptics point to expectation and suggestion. That explanation fails to address cases involving individuals who were not informed about the building's reputation beforehand, yet experienced the same symptoms in the same locations. In several documented tours, guides halted progression due to a participant's sudden collapse or disorientation, even when the individual expressed no prior anxiety. What makes the site particularly unsettling is the lack of escalation. No one claims possession. No dramatic manifestations dominate the record. Instead, the phenomenon remains subtle, controlled, and bodily. It does not frighten first. It weakens. Officials have never closed the site due to danger. It remains accessible under controlled conditions. Environmental testing continues. Each round concludes with the same assessment. Nothing present that should cause the reported effects. And yet the reports continue. Visitors often describe a specific moment of realization, not fear, but clarity, a sense that the building is not reacting emotionally, but physically, as if certain spaces retain a function unrelated to memory or belief. The sanatorium no longer treats patients. It no longer houses the sick, but people still leave it feeling unwell without understanding why. The most disturbing possibility is not that something remains there. It is that whatever causes these reactions does not announce itself as threat. It simply acts on the body long enough to be noticed, then allows the person to leave, as if the building itself decides when the exposure is sufficient. The disappearance that changed how searches are conducted. The disappearance began without urgency. A single person entered a familiar stretch of wilderness for a routine activity. No extreme weather, no known conflict, no indication that the situation would become anything more than a late return. That assumption collapsed quickly. When contact was lost, local responders initiated standard search procedures. The terrain was challenging, but not hostile. Trails were marked. Visibility was reasonable. The expectation was that the individual would be located within hours, or at most a few days. That expectation proved wrong. Search teams entered the forest and encountered a problem that would repeat itself throughout the operation. Evidence did not behave normally. Footprints appeared, then vanished without transition. Scent trails picked up by dogs ended abruptly in areas with no logical exit routes. In some cases, teams reported the unsettling sensation of circling the same ground repeatedly, despite following mapped paths. The search expanded. More personnel, more resources, aerial sweeps, infrared equipment. The result remained unchanged. No body, no clothing, no tools, no accidental indicators such as falls, blood, or damaged terrain. The forest absorbed the effort without returning information. Daniel Boone National Forest became the focal point of the operation. Experienced outdoors professionals noted inconsistencies they struggled to document formally. Sound behaved unpredictably. Calls did not travel expected distances. Whistles seemed to return from incorrect directions. These details were discussed privately, rarely written down. As days passed, the case shifted from rescue to recovery without the usual justification. No remains were found to justify that transition. It was made because all known variables had been exhausted. The missing person had not exited the forest. They had not been located within it. The environment itself became the only remaining factor. What followed was procedural change. Search leaders reviewed the operation and acknowledged that traditional grid-based methods failed to account for how this terrain interfered with orientation and evidence persistence. New protocols were drafted. Teams began staggering entry times. Reference points were doubled. Redundancy was added to prevent the disorientation that had quietly affected earlier efforts. None of these changes were announced publicly as reactions to a single case. Official language framed them as general improvements. But among search and rescue professionals, the connection was understood. This disappearance exposed a vulnerability that had been underestimated. Family members were left with no resolution, no physical confirmation, no final explanation that could be accepted emotionally or logically. The forest did not produce closure. It did not even produce fragments. Years later, similar reports emerged in nearby areas, not identical but familiar. Evidence thinning too cleanly, trails ending too neatly, searchers describing a sense of being guided away from something rather than toward it. The most disturbing aspect is not the idea of danger. Wilderness is expected to be dangerous. It is the precision of the absence, the way the forest removes people from the system without leaving the chaos normally associated with loss. The individual who disappeared was not inexperienced. They were not reckless, they simply entered a landscape that does not behave passively. The forest remains open, trails are still used, signs warn about weather and wildlife, but not about the deeper problem this case revealed, that some environments do not just hide mistakes, they neutralize them, and once that happens, even the most disciplined search can be reduced to movement without answers. Inside a space that has already decided to keep what it took, none of these mysteries rely on belief. They rely on records, witnesses, and unanswered conclusions. They happened in places people still visit, drive through, walk through, trust. The night creatures surrounded a farmhouse. The incident did not begin with fear. It began with confusion. On a quiet night in a rural area where sounds carry far and neighbors are distant, a family noticed something they could not place. A light in the sky, not moving like an aircraft, not fading like a star. It hovered, descended, and disappeared behind the tree line near their property. Minutes later, the first sound came from outside the house. When the family stepped onto the porch, they did not describe a monster. They described a shape, small, upright, moving deliberately. Its eyes reflected light unnaturally. Its limbs appeared too long for its body. When a warning shot was fired, the figure did not fall. It retreated into the darkness without sound. This pattern repeated itself for hours. The farmhouse became surrounded. Shapes appeared on the roofline, at the windows, near the doors. Each time the family attempted to scare them away, the result was the same. No blood, no bodies. No clear reaction consistent with an animal or a person. Just withdrawal, then return. Panicked, the family fled and went directly to the local police station. Their condition mattered. Officers noted visible distress, shaking hands, disorganized speech, signs consistent with people who believed they were under threat. Not intoxication, not performance. Law enforcement returned with them to the property. What they found did not confirm creatures, but it did confirm activity. Spent shell casings, damage to screens and doors, disturbances around the house that suggested movement at height, not on the ground. No evidence of hoax equipment. No footprints that could be cleanly identified. The case became known as the Hopkinsville encounter, tied permanently to the area now associated with Hopkinsville. What is often forgotten is that authorities did not dismiss it immediately. Reports were filed, statements were preserved. The lack of physical proof was noted, but so was the lack of motive. The family gained nothing from the attention. They did not seek publicity, they did not profit. Investigators explored alternative explanations: owls, misidentified animals, shared hysteria. None fully accounted for the reported behavior. Animals do not surround buildings repeatedly. They do not retreat consistently under fire without injury. They do not move across rooftops leaving minimal trace. What makes the case endure is not the description of the entities. It is the duration. This was not a single sighting. It was an extended event involving multiple witnesses, consistent details, and law enforcement presence before, during, and after. By morning, the activity stopped. No explanation arrived with daylight. The official position drifted toward ambiguity, possible misinterpretation, stress, darkness, the kind of language used when certainty is unavailable, but dismissal feels irresponsible. Decades later, the site remains ordinary. No ongoing phenomena, no visible marker explaining why it entered the national record. The family carried the event with them for the rest of their lives, maintaining the same account without escalation or embellishment. Whatever surrounded that farmhouse did not leave proof behind. It did not need to. It left something harder to erase. A case where multiple people under observation reported the same impossible thing for hours, then were left with no answer that fit the facts. The silence afterward was not relief. It was unresolved pressure. And that pressure is why the night in Christian County still refuses to settle into a comfortable explanation. The highway where people vanish without crashes. The stretch of road looks unremarkable. 2 lanes, long intervals without intersections, fields on one side, tree lines on the other. Locals drive it daily without incident. That normality is what makes the pattern difficult to accept. Over the years, multiple disappearances occurred along this corridor, without the element investigators rely on most. There were no collisions, no damaged vehicles, no signs of sudden mechanical failure. In several cases, cars were found parked or stopped in ways that suggested intentional decisions, not emergencies. Engines were off, fuel remained, personal belongings stayed behind, wallets, phones, identification, all present. Search efforts followed established procedure. Dogs were deployed, helicopters covered surrounding land, nearby waterways were checked. The expectation was that evidence would emerge quickly. In open terrain, mistakes announce themselves. Tracks appear, clothing surfaces. Something breaks the pattern. Here, nothing did. In one case, tire marks showed a controlled pullover, not a loss of control. Footprints were located leading away from the vehicle, then gradually thinned and ended without explanation. No struggle indicators, no abrupt changes in direction, just absence. Weather records eliminated storms. Temperature shifts were not extreme enough to force irrational behavior. There were no reports of suspicious activity nearby, no witnesses describing altercations or unfamiliar vehicles. The road itself offered no reason to abandon shelter and walk into darkness. Officials classified the cases individually: exposure, disorientation, voluntary departure. Each explanation addressed one possibility while failing to explain the shared details. Why leave essentials behind? Why walk away calmly? Why vanish without scattering evidence? Families pushed back. They described loved ones as cautious, familiar with the area, unlikely to abandon a vehicle without clear cause. Investigators listened, documented objections, then closed files when searches produced nothing new. What complicates these cases is repetition. One unexplained disappearance can be dismissed as anomaly. Several sharing structural similarities form a pattern that resists coincidence. Yet no formal link was established. Each incident was kept separate on paper. Search and rescue personnel later acknowledged something informally. This road behaves differently, not in a supernatural sense, but in how evidence refuses to behave predictably. Dogs lose trails faster than expected. Sounds carry oddly at night. Distances feel compressed. People underestimate how quickly isolation sets in once the engine is off and the lights go dark. That does not explain everything. It explains some risk. It does not explain the complete removal of individuals from the environment without trace. The road remains open. There are no warning signs, no memorials marking where someone stepped out of a car and never completed the next action. Traffic continues. Life moves around the missing. What lingers is not fear of the road itself. It is distrust of assumptions, the belief that disappearance requires chaos. That something dramatic must precede loss. Here, nothing dramatic happens. No crash, no scream, no interruption visible to passing drivers. Just a vehicle that stops behaving like a transition point and starts looking like a final known position. The highway does not announce danger. It does not demand attention. It simply provides a place where people can leave the known world quietly enough that even evidence seems unsure where they went. Kentucky does not advertise these cases, but it never erased them either. They remain suspended between documentation and silence, waiting for someone to notice what never fit. If you were standing in any of these locations, knowing what you know now, would you feel curious or cautious? Write which mystery unsettled you the most and explain why it stayed with you, not what you think happened, what it made you feel. And if you believe some truths remain unresolved because resolution would be inconvenient, stay here. Some places do not hide answers. They outlast them.